Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to be working on the 72 Chevy Prerunner project, including doing a bit of work on the body, acetone vapor smoothing the fender flares, designing and printing some bedside pieces, as well as working on the front body mounts and more. I'm sure many of you watching are already familiar with this project, but for those who aren't, I'll be sure to leave a link to a playlist below in the description. In short, this project started as a FIU Fighter 1 1/12 scale short course truck, which I've been gradually modifying into a Prerunner style 1972 Chevy pickup. In a video from several weeks ago, I designed and printed these custom front fender flares, which look great on the truck and really help give it a more aggressive, desert racing ready look. Though on closer inspection, there are a lot of surface imperfections and texturing visible on these pieces. To remove this texturing and help make the surface of these fenders smooth, I'm going to be using acetone vapor. Those of you who are familiar with 3D printing are probably aware of this technique for smoothing parts made in specific materials such as ABS plastic, which is what these fender flares are printed in. The main advantages of this process is that it's simple and doesn't require much labor. I find that this process works best for parts like these, which don't contain any small details or hard edges that need to be preserved. This is because the acetone essentially melts the outer surface, causing layering and surface imperfections like what you see here to be smoothed out, but it will equally affect small details and sharp edges, and with time can deform the part. I start by bending some wire so that it will support the fender without having any part of it touching the bottom of the container. I trim and sand away a few of the larger imperfections. I want to have the outer surface relatively uniform prior to smoothing, since by the time some of the worst bumps and over extrusions become smooth, other sections might start to become too soft and deform. I make sure to use a container with a clear lid so that I can see the progress without having to open it up. I also make sure that the container will not be affected by the acetone. I then place a paper towel on the bottom and sides of the container, and then place a piece of aluminum foil above that. I confirm that everything will fit and that the part won't come into contact with the paper towel or container before I pour in the acetone. Once I've confirmed everything will fit, I pour in the acetone and close the lid. I hope this goes without saying, but acetone vapor can be harmful, so be sure you are taking the appropriate precautions when working with it. I think I left this fender flare in for about an hour after checking it every 10 or 15 minutes to monitor the progress. The acetone will continue to affect the part after it's been removed from the container, so certainly keep this in mind. Although in hindsight, I probably could have kept them in a little longer and gotten a better result, I had a tough time printing these parts and really didn't want to have to reprint them because of a mistake, so I wanted to play it safe and not keep them in too long. As you can see, the acetone has certainly made a difference in the surface finish of the part, which is especially apparent when comparing it to the other one. I repeated the same process to smooth the other fender flare, once again keeping it in for about an hour. I'll be continuing to do some more post-print finishing work, which I'll be showing later on to really get these parts smooth and ready for paint. I made sure to let these parts sit for several days before doing any sanding. Moving on to the body, as you may recall in a previous video, I applied a light coat of primer to help identify any areas that still need more work. Overall, the body's looking great, though there are a few places where I want to do some sanding and add a little filler. As I mentioned before, I'm not concerned about trying to make this body look perfect, but there are a few spots that I want to improve prior to painting. I started by doing some sanding, mostly in areas around the back side of the cab where the 3D printed piece is joined to the polycarbonate body. I also did a little bit of sanding around some of the openings for the windows. After that, I sanded the entire outer surface of the body in preparation for paint. With the body looking good, I also did some sanding on both of the Fender Flares. There were a few spots on both the body and the Fender Flares that I wanted to add some filler to help smooth out. I decided to try using some Squadron white putty, which was recently recommended to me by a friend. I simply squeezed some of the filler out of the tube and then pressed it and smoothed it against the surface. I really liked working with this putty. The consistency and tackiness of it felt good and was really easy to work into place as it stuck to the surface well. I look forward to trying this out on some other projects in the future. This stuff does dry very quickly and the fumes are quite strong, so keep this in mind if you're going to give this product a try. I let the putty dry for 2 hours before sanding it smooth. Again, I'm very pleased with this putty. Some other products I've used have a tendency to flake off in large chunks, but this seems to have really adhered well to the surface and is very easy to sand. With that complete, I was ready to apply some primer to the Fender Flares. I applied it very thick, using a lot of coats to help provide a little extra smoothing. In between coats, I worked on getting the roof rack situated. After aligning it roughly in the position that it will be located, I marked the position of where I will be making 2 holes for the wires to fit through. I used a body reamer to create the holes, just large enough for the wires to easily fit through. Next, I wanted to figure out where I was going to position the roof rack mounts. After getting an idea of where they will need to be positioned, I glued them in place onto the roof rack. I'm hoping that some super glue will be strong enough to keep the mount solidly attached to the roof rack. I don't plan on doing any extremely rough driving with this vehicle, so this should be sufficient. I will be mounting the lower part of the mount to the body using a thicker, stronger adhesive. I know I've said it before, but I really like the look of this roof rack, and I think it's an excellent addition to this truck. Next, I moved on to getting the front of the body mounted. First by assembling the 3D printed magnetic body mounts that I'll be using. I'll be adding the STL files for these mounts to the Make It RC Thingiverse page and MyMiniFactory page very soon in case anyone is interested. I'll put a link in the description below after they're uploaded. I placed a small piece of foam padding that will sit between the 2 magnets to make removing the body a little easier. As I've mentioned previously, I'm going to be utilizing the factory front body post holder and hardware to secure the front of the body. I wanted to design some custom body posts rather than modifying the existing ones. Using the factory body posts as a reference for measurements, I designed a custom body post in Fusion 360. Once complete, I printed each post. I did a little bit of trimming around the bottom to remove some of the wider lower layers, and then I test fitted them. They fit well, though they are a little bit loose. If this ends up being an issue, I can always use some glue to make them solid. But for now, I'm just mounting them using the original screws. I then moved on to adjusting the position of the mounts so that the body will sit at the correct height. As you can see, the mounts are going to need to be lowered a lot in order for the front of the body to be at the correct height. I started by trimming down the posts. I then grinded down both the posts and the body mounts to get them as low as possible, but they were still too high. I then printed out a new set of body mounts that are one piece and do not pivot, making these able to be positioned much lower. Like before, I glued the magnets onto each mount. I then began removing material from the bottom until the body was positioned how I wanted. Once I got the height of one of the mounts correct, I made the second mount the same height. I used shoe goo to secure the body mounts. While the glue was drying, I worked on designing the bedside pieces, which I modeled in Blender. Designing this part was a bit tricky since I really didn't have any good reference material to use, and the larger wheels and wheelbase of this vehicle makes getting the proportions and shape to look right a bit more difficult. I just started out with a basic shape and gradually tweaked it until it started to look roughly how I wanted it to. I used the front fender flares as a bit of a guide since I wanted to roughly match the curvature and general shape of that part. Fortunately, after about 40 minutes of messing with the design, I was able to get a result that I was satisfied with. I printed it out initially using ABS plastic just like what I did with the fender flares. I figured I would use acetone again to smooth them like I did previously, however some serious cracks formed during printing which resulted in these pieces being unusable. The reason these parts are two different colors is that I ran out of white filament part of the way through the print and I had to switch to using black. I reprinted the bedsides using PLA plastic, which turned out great. I also printed out a new grill. Although initially I thought I would use an SLA printer to make the grill, I think I'm going to be using an FDM printed one instead. I used a shorter layer height to minimize the visible layering, and I think with a little bit of finishing work, this grill is going to look great. To conclude that evening, I decided to do a quick mock-up of everything so far to see how the truck is progressing. Figuring out exactly how I'm going to mount the bedside pieces is something I'm going to need to brainstorm a bit, though I do already have some ideas of how I'm going to do so. Unlike with some other projects where everything is designed at once and everything is planned out, leaving no question of how something is going to be mounted, where something is going to be placed, or what the finished product will look like, this project has been more laid back, and I'm just sort of going along piece by piece, and so far I'm really liking how this truck is progressing. Once I'm finished getting all of the body panels mounted, I'll be ready to move on to painting the body. As far as the exterior of the truck, I think the only thing left to add is the front bumper, which I'll probably be keeping relatively subtle. Of course, I'll be continuing to show the progress of this project here on YouTube, as well as over on the other social media pages as well, which you'll find links to below in the description. One final thing I want to mention, aside from the grill, bedside pieces, and the body mounts I'm using, all of the other custom 3D printed parts of this project are up on Thingiverse and on MyMiniFactory. You'll find links to these pages below in the description. I'll be adding the remaining parts to these pages soon. And as always, to conclude today's video, I want to show some of the amazing projects and vehicles that have been posted to the Make It RC Facebook group. That is all for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.